Hello, my name is Kemp. I'm a concept artist here at Massive Black. This is the first part in my 4-part series on vehicle design. In this video, I'll be going over making thumbnail sketches of the vehicle based on a description, and I'll kind of be talking about things I normally do at work and how it relates to real jobs. And I hope you enjoy. Okay, so here's our fictional job sheet. This is the KELS 999 LS, Compact Emergency Long Range Laboratory System. We're concepting a vehicle, so what I want to do, this is my personal project, I want to try to make a concept that is as near future and real world as possible and base it off of a couple of vehicles that I'd really liked. I typed up this short description, and it's somewhat typical of normal descriptions we get. Usually a client will spell out what the vehicle needs to be. You know, we have our lengthy descriptions about what the game world is like. Usually the art director will give us a sheet like this with several reference pictures and say, you know, this is what it needs to be. We really like these things about these references. I try to incorporate some of that stuff, but make it up as well. So my requirements are near future tracked utility vehicle for use in a hostile environment. I really liked this. This one, A, is the Israeli medical version of the Sherman tank. This vehicle under the letter B you see here is what most heavily influenced the design. And this guy under C is another utility vehicle that was used by the German army after World War II. But that vehicle you saw under B, that was the two-segmented vehicle, you see it right there as well, really what most heavily influenced this design. I really liked the idea of a vehicle that had two parts and could easily flow over the terrain. It's kind of unconventional. It's not what you normally see on tanks and tracked armored vehicles. And I also liked that it didn't necessarily look military. A lot of vehicles that you're going to do for games are going to have huge guns and be military in origin and, you know, need to look badass, etc. So for my project, I wanted to make something that was somewhere between a civilian and a military thing. Here we go. So this video is sped up, but basically you're just going to want to start with the tracks. One of the most defining things about armored vehicles is the tread set, and that's one of the most iconic things you're going to find on those vehicles, and it's what's going to make those vehicles those vehicles. What we're doing here is I'm just starting straight from SketchUp, or from Photoshop, sorry. And typically I will do either starting into Photoshop right off the bat or sketching on graph paper. For this video, we're going to go over doing sketches of a side view. Depending on what game you're working on and who you're working for, your process is always going to be a little different. For this vehicle, I really wanted to play around with the side views first. And I like doing a side view first because it can generate ideas about what the vehicle is going to look like, and you're not embroiled in trying to fix perspective issues all the time. You can sort of think about the shape of the vehicle and what the proportions are going to be, and you know where the various parts are going to go, and you're sort of diagramming it out. You know, this is the way I like to work. I like to do a sort of arduous amount of pre-planning before I make my stuff. Being a concept artist is all about getting it done in time and getting as many variations as you can to your client so that they can make a decision about what they want. So as you can see here, I'm pretty heavily influenced by the shape of that German vehicle that I showed, the one that was under the letter C. I liked the sloped glacis plate in the front, and I liked its compactness. It looks like it's an armored vehicle, but it's kind of light, and it has sort of a character to it. real armored vehicles are always going to be dictated by their functions, and some look really absurd and some look really cool, and for the most part it's just a result of what function it's supposed to fill. So I'm going to heavily stress that like the functionality needs to be considered. It definitely needs to be considered. But you're also designing for video games, so you want it to look cool. It's a fine balance between making it look cool, making it fill the requirement, and making it not stupid. For me, concepting is all about trying to make it believable for what you're doing, and therefore like making, continuing the suspension of belief. Successful games make you feel like you're in the game. Successful movies do the same thing. We can talk about taste and what needs to be done to make it like a sellable game, but from the outset, I'm always of the opinion that I want to make it pass my personal test on what makes a cool concept. Right now, I'm fleshing out the treads and using a lot of shift copying and selection tools in Photoshop. I like to bounce around between a couple different techniques. Right now, I'm just sketching with normal brush tool, and I believe I have the pressure sensitivity on, so I can sort of draw it out. And like I said before, drawing by hand is definitely something that is nice to do in the very beginning, especially when you're a little unsure about what you want to do and what you even want to do with your vehicle and what shape it's going to be. But starting out in Photoshop's not a bad idea either, because it gets you to that product quickly. You always have to think about the time constraints and how much you're going to get in on the budget, on the time that's budgeted out. Looks like I'm cleaning this guy up, adding a little rack on the back, little utilitarian rack. That's a trick I picked up from buying model tank kits. That was kind of an obsession of mine for a little bit, and it still is when the time allows. But I noticed that on a couple of the tanks I put together, they had a really smart use of racks to allow the passengers to attach whatever it is they need to attach to the vehicle. Real tanks and real armored vehicles are they have like no space to work with inside of the vehicle. There's no cargo space because everything is crammed with so much stuff. So any additional stuff they need to take with them, they have to attach to the exterior of the vehicle. This is, of course, something fictional. So, a rack looks cool because it looks like it has a purpose, but, does mine really need one? Who cares? When you add details like that, it's nice to think of a reason for them after the fact. If there's like a cool shape that you find that you want to put in the vehicle, it's not a bad idea to think about what purpose that interesting shape would serve. And then you can talk about it when you deliver the concept and make yourself look really smart. So, hopefully someone will find that useful. Right now I'm drawing in the suspension system. Again, putting together model kits gave me a crash course in what tank suspensions look like. I don't have an engineering degree, but it's not rocket science. So, really understanding how like these pretty basic machines work is kind of essential to concepting them. You're going to do vehicle design, you're going to create a world of problems for the modelers when the game starts to get made. If you make a really impractical suspension wheel set and you don't allow enough room for the wheels to fit in their wheel wells or to turn, all this stuff has to be considered for the final product. So the easier the sooner you put that stuff in and allow for it, the easier this whole process is going to go. Right now I'm putting in some basic values, cleaning it up. And so it's kind of coming together. You can see how I'm really kind of heavily influenced by that German vehicle, but giving a little variation. Sharpen it up with the unsharpened mask. You do want to be aware of the resolution that your final image is going to be delivered at, because you can have a really amazing piece when it's huge and then it might not reduce well. So it's definitely worth your time to check out the sharpens. The Smart Sharpen is something I've been using a lot, and I don't think I use it in this video, but that's because I was using unsharpened mask, and that's been my favorite up until now. Now it's all about Smart Sharpen. And shift copy. Shift copy is super, super useful. For those of you who don't know about the copy all hotkey, if you select something and you have a gazillion layers and you do a Control-Shift-C, that will copy everything that's within the selection. And you can paste all of that into a new layer on top, which creates a lot of potential for moving stuff around really quickly on the fly. That's only going to be useful for that if you're being liberal with the layers and not worrying about keeping your layers really organized. At this sketching phase, it's kind of like anything goes, and you really shouldn't get too worried about layer management. Well, I'm of the opinion you shouldn't get too worried about layer management. Just pile it on, and whatever gets you to your final product is what you should use. I'm going to fill that in, fill this stuff in. I'm glad this video is sped up because it makes me really look like I know what I'm doing. So that's kind of breaking up the silhouette, adding some kind of piece of machinery. It's like the AC units that are on trucks, on big rigs these days. So I'm starting the third thumbnail here. I'm going to work over the tread set made for the first one, but adding a little variation. And I should talk a little bit about paths. Paths are really useful for making nice, precise line work using circles, straight lines, stuff like that. So they are a little annoying to get to know how to use at first, but well worth your time, especially in regards to doing mechanical concepts. So kind of searching around, drawing out the chassis. Sort of trying to be quick about it, but not too quick as to make a mess. You want to keep those shapes simple, but add the right amount of detail to make the shape broken into sort of larger shapes and smaller parts that have mechanical things exposed. you know, this is a concept, and it's a fictional concept, but it's more practical to cut a piece of metal 4 times than 6 times. So the more clipped edges that you put in the vehicle, the more sort of impractical it's going to get. You know, having sort of an understanding of what makes shapes look practical is going to help in making this thing look near future. So it looks like for these lines, I've turned the pressure sensitivity off, and I'm using the shift click feature. If you put down your Wacom pen on the tablet and then hold down shift and you click down in another portion of the screen, it's going to draw a straight even line in between those 2 points. So I use those a lot when I'm sketching initially. Very helpful for doing mechanical stuff, but not all the time. It can sort of make a mess when you're really using searching lines. I mean, if you're really sketching and you're really unsure about what you want to make, it's not the best thing to use. If you sort of know where to go, it can be nice in making clean line work. So here's me making a gaff. I'm trying to find a custom brush to make that cargo rack sort of netting look real, and as you can see, I'm getting nowhere. Mess with the sharpen, and does it work? No, it doesn't. Erase it. Try again with a different brush. Oh, that's a pattern, but it's not quite working. For this thumbnail, I was looking at, if you look at the beginning of the video, the picture of the one that sort of looked like a tractor. There's actually a tank training vehicle. So it's basically like a tank, but it has this civilian type cab on the top. And I really liked how the shapes that were going on in that one. So that's the vehicle that started as my jumping point. And I'll include the job sheet in the download so that you can see what I'm talking about. So this is the brush that finally worked. Nice technology brush. I think that might have gotten that from Matt. So thank you, Matt. Diaz. And again, shift copying gets you a long way. So fill in the shape. You know, that the final values pass just sort of helps to lock in what the overall shape is going to look like, because you don't want to post, you don't want to deliver these too big because they're thumbnails. That's sort of inviting criticism, but also getting past the point. The point is to kind of have all these overall shapes at a glance that your client can look over sort of quickly and say, well, I like the shapes that are going on in this, but I don't like the shapes that are going on in this. And I want to use this kind of suspension, but not this kind of a suspension. You know, the thumbnailing stage is about variety. It's about giving your clients choices. It's also about designing and sort of steering them where you want to go with the thing. You know, the more you give over to the client, the more you might not like working on the finished product. I mean, you have to. I would say don't sacrifice personal design for client variety, because you're doing your client a disservice as well as yourself. So now we're going to do the trailer. So doing the trailer portion, I should talk a little bit about that two-part vehicle that I showed earlier. It's generally called an ATTC, which stands for All-Terrain Tracked Carrier, and it was originally built by a Swedish company named Hägglunds, Hagglunds, I think. And what's unique about the vehicle is that the engine is only housed in one of the two compartments, but the connection in the middle shares, it's got an axle, so it powers both the trailer and the lead car. So it's not like a normal trailer. It's like both vehicles act like vehicles with independent power sources, but they only share one engine. What's advantageous about breaking the vehicle up into those two shapes is that it can go over more types of terrain. If it's two smaller parts, it's going to sort of snake over the terrain, and each part can sort of move independent of one another. So if you're interested in this thing, there's definitely some cool vehicles to check out, or some cool videos to check out on the internet about it. And I just recently found a website that has a lot of details about this particular vehicle, but they're basically known as an ATTC, and there's several variants made by different countries now. The normal one can have 16 passengers, and there's a ton of different variants for different requirements. So, for this concept, I was sort of planning on making it something for some sort of like fictional off-world thing. It's always fun to concept what things are going to be like for exploring Mars. So, as you'll see in the later part of the video series, I'm going to be tooling it towards some sort of like hostile environment, expeditionary type of vehicle, and for like a scientific role, but still keeping that flair of military hardware and armored vehicles, because it looks cool and we're making cool concepts, right? Okay, so here, this is the better tread set than what I started with. I'm going to go ahead and name that brush Treads. I just drew that one tread segment in a new document and made a brush out of it. So if you go to Edit, Define Brush Preset, you can get your new brush. Wanted to space it out so that each segment sort of locks appropriately with the next one. I went in and I set the direction to direction so that it does that and follows where your pen's going to move. And here I'm making a really awesome looking concept. And now the fun's over. Okay, so going with that kind of click, shift, click, the same thing's gonna work with this custom tread brush. I want it to wrap around these wheels, so I'm gonna click it, hold down shift, and click it again, and then just kind of tap it down to make it wrap around that wheel. And it's not perfect, but it serves our purposes. Wrap it around the front wheel. And assembling the tracks like this really became evident after putting together a model of it. You always have an idea of what treads should look like because everyone's seen pictures of tanks since they were kids. But I never really understood how the tracks were held into place by the wheels and how the drive wheel and the drive sprocket work, or how the road wheels and the drive sprocket and the chassis and all that stuff interconnect. So again, I'm going to strongly advise that you look into model kits if you're interested in vehicle design. So far, the modeling company Tamiya seems to make the best ones. They have really nicely detailed parts and a lot of extra stuff in the kits. So, you know, if you can't find them where you live, there's a ton of those on the internet. There's a ton on eBay and Amazon. They're definitely worth checking out. So here I'm using the paths again. Those of you who are not familiar with the paths options and the paths palette, it's located next to the channels. And it basically just is vector tools for Photoshop. Pretty much the same as Illustrator's, but it's a little different. The hotkeys are a little different. You have a couple settings available. I think by default, Photoshop will set it to fill a shape based on the paths that you draw. And that can get frustrating because it makes a new layer with a layer mask. And that's something that you don't need to mess with. So when you initially start to work with paths, there's 3 buttons on the upper left. You can select paths only, or you can select fill the shape. That's not what it's called, but it's something like that. And then there's another option. So for these purposes, you want to make sure you're set to paths only. And what that allows you to do is to draw the paths and work with the vector lines, and then have that set. And then once you get the lines where you want them to be, you can go to the paths palette and stroke the path. So draw the line, and it'll draw a line based on what brush you have selected and what size brush you have selected. So that's how you control what is drawn with the path. And they're extremely useful for making perfect circles and straight lines and mechanical type drawings and diagrams. So here I'm adjusting some of that stuff a little bit more, putting in the teeth of the drive sprocket. And there I just shift copied that stuff to give the impression that it's locked in with the tracks. I like to stick with tool presets over the normal brushes. I think I've got a couple of different people's brushes loaded from CA and ones that I've made, and that list can get really big. It's really nice to have all those brushes available, but with tool presets you can sort of you get more options on like what is stored in the tool preset, but it's also just another list that you can customize of tools you like to use. So my tool preset list is getting kind of large and unmanageable now, but at one point it was smaller, and it's nice because you can just name it and you have a list of your named tool presets, and it shows the presets based on what tool you're in. So putting in the suspension, you just want to kind of suggest the forms. Suggest that it's a real mechanical diagram without it needing to be. You're really going to get a lot of mileage out of referencing side views for real tanks, looking at the proportions that are used, the way that the various mechanics are represented in a line drawing. You know, selling your concept as something real is definitely going to help your concept. So it's a mix of large shapes and small shapes. large, you know, foundational chassis with trimmings sort of put on the exterior. And it's not a bad idea to try to build it in your head. Go from general to specific and sort of, as you saw, I just started with the wheels and built it up from there. You want to pay attention to balance. You want to make sure it's not too heavy in the front or heavy in the back. And I probably broke my own rule on some of these, but it's a balance between making something look cool and fantastic and making it look believable and practical. For the values pass, I just picked 3 values. Just sort of think of the lighting being like with the lightest plane is the one that's facing you, and then you work down from there, and then make those underneath parts darker to push them in the background a little more. And that sort of makes the viewer look at the treads and the wheels and the top over the chassis and the suspension. So painting up a little bit of those forms, but not spending too long on it. And I'm going to put that over to the side in case I need it again. You can definitely save a lot of time by reusing parts that you've made and making variations of parts that you've made. And a lot of the time, making a variation of something that you came up with originally is going to be more successful than the original concept. The process of design is like a pull and push and a give and take and an experimentation. The first thing you do is always going to suck. The last thing you do might suck because you're burnt out, but it might be the best thing that you did. And there's certainly been plenty of times when I've gotten to the last thumbnail and thought, I just need one more to finish it up, and it ends up being the best one. Finishing out the trailer on this guy. Now, I have no idea how that central connection works on the real ATTC. So this part is completely fudged. But you want to make it look like it has some sort of articulation, like it has some sort of purpose. I've been around farm vehicles for a certain amount of time in my life. So, that may have helped in trying to come up with something to connect the trailer and the tractor portion. As long as you mess with it and it's possible to make something look like it could be functional, even though it's complete bullshit, which is what that connection is in this one. You're trying to make things look like they're supposed to be there when they're not. So there I was using the transform tools to extend lines. instead of drawing over new ones and having overlapping lines. You get into the habit of transforming your original stuff. You can kind of stretch and pull and save yourself some time. And put in the value pass. So there's that copy all hotkey working out quite nicely. I could fill in the values for that rear tread set, but that would be a waste of time because I've already painted it in. So I just made a selection, did a Control-Shift-C, Control-V for paste, and instantly had that tread set to copy to the trailer. Once you make your brush like that, you can select the brush and then select the path that you've drawn, and it will draw your custom brush over the path. So when I made that tread set earlier, I did that by hand, but if you wanted to be a little more precise about it, you could, and there you have it. You could draw the path out first and tweak the path with the Bezier curves, which are those little handle deals you get off of the path points, which are the black dots you see. That was stroking the path real quick. Each time you make paths, it saves it it's set up just like the layers palette, but it basically keeps making new path layers, and it makes one called the work path, I think. I don't think it's called a layer. And that's the temporary one. So if you want to save the things you've done, you need to go into the Path tab and click Save Paths. And then it'll save it as Layer 1 or whatever you want to call it. So you don't want to be too wed to that either. It's going to slow you down. I usually just draw the paths on the fly. But if it's something crazy, like if I'm setting up perspective lines or something, then I'm gonna save it. Okay, so cleaning up these treads, selections, shift copy, transform, Control T. Those are your best friends. That grid hotkey is Control comma. That turns the grid on and off, and you set the units for the grids under grids in preferences. So again, I want to mention sketching by hand on graph paper. It's sort of a more intuitive way of working out your ideas. It's easy for me to draw a circle by hand on the fly, and I pretty much can't do it by hand on Photoshop, so I end up using the paths. And that's fine if you're quick enough with it, but you end up having to draw a bunch of paths and then go to the appropriate menu, etc. You really can't give up the benefits of drawing by hand, or just so many. So usually if this is a real job, I might do like half of them by hand, and then maybe enhance them a little bit in Photoshop, and then do the other set in Photoshop. Like if you're doing 10 thumbnails, do 5 by hand and five in Photoshop. And what we're going to get into in this video in a little bit is sort of mixing and matching. It's definitely going to save you time and possibly end up with a better design. So it's not cheating if you add enough to it, and it's not necessarily a bad thing for your client, because you can end up with something that might be better. So you'll see that in action pretty soon. Right now I'm making this tread set more based on the real ATTC. It's got an actually real unique way that the suspension is set up, sort of based on it, but I don't believe this is how it's set up. I think the real ATTC has 6 road wheels, but I don't remember, nor does it matter. You obviously don't want to copy verbatim from the real thing, but it's okay to borrow. And video game, design and video game definitely borrows from real stuff. One of the classic examples of that is the dropship in Aliens. I think the story goes that Cameron bought a Apache helicopter and bashed the kit together with something else, and ended up with this really iconic thing that's been copied in games a ton of times. Kit bashing is something I want to get into. I think that's how they came up with a lot of the vehicles in the original Star Wars series, which were ultra successful. So I think when I got to this design, I also realized that these really large trailers that we have on the original on the preceding 3 thumbnails was really huge, and wouldn't allow enough play between the two cars. So if the vehicle was going through like a really shallow or like a large dip where one part had to be going up and one part had to be down, you have to think about leaving enough room for the 2 cars not to hit each other, but still be able to go over the terrain. In a practical vehicle, those are things that those are things that are going to dictate the final shape. So they're worth thinking about. It goes back to that point I was talking about of leaving enough room in the wheel wells for the things to turn. So by the time I got to this stage, I was like, oh, that really isn't going to be practical. When you look back at the reference, you understand why the 2 cars are roughly the same size and sort of shaped the way they are, is to allow room for the things to bend. And I'm just going to shift copy that sucker and take that piece and flip it. And that has real world application. If you're making a vehicle, you want to be able to reuse as many of the parts as possible. American tanks historically and in the present are known for having lots of interchangeable parts. From a practical standpoint, from a practical manufacturing standpoint, that's going to allow you to make these war machines faster and repair them easier. At this point, I'm sort of winging the middle connection part. I want it to look like it has lots of articulation. Without figuring all of that out. That's something that can come later, as long as it's implied. If you just leave it out, you're in trouble. But if you imply articulation, then you can get away with it for now. Get some of these details drawn out. And I'm just sort of making up some of this stuff. This is some sort of research device. This is the compact emergency laboratory system. So I'm thinking in the end it's going to have various like sensors and other stuff attached to it. One of the vehicles in that reference sheet I had was a tank recovery vehicle, and I like those a lot because they have so much stuff mounted on them. They're basically the same chassis as the tanks themselves, but they have this huge crane put on it and a number of other utility sort of attachments to help it service the vehicles. But they have this cool utilitarian industrial look. And at this point, I decided to add a plow to the front to give it another like piece of functionality. And I think at this point, I was deciding that it was going to be some sort of like vehicle that's used for exploring, exploring planets, exploring Mars. I think at this point I'd watched the Going to Mars series on the Science Channel, which is an excellent series. Has a really cool vehicle in it. Now figuring out the windows. Again, using that shift point technique. That can be a little weird at first, getting your lines to go where you need them to go, but it gets a little more intuitive if you use it for a little bit. This is a this was intended to be a larger like door to go on the rear compartment. I was thinking this one would open up. That's some sort of latch. Fill that sucker in. Square brush is kind of nice for that because you can get that edge. It's going to go super fast. And just filling in the shape helps a lot to sort of convey what the overall shape's going to be. When you get into some diagram-y like line work like this, it can be kind of confusing, like what is a solid shape and what's not. Shift copy that guy because it's on a new layer, so I don't have to fill in all of those by hand. Definitely want to take stock in shortcuts that are available. Copy that guy over because it's the same shape. And then throw in those extra values. Just making the underside dark adds a little bit of a graphic hierarchy to what you're looking at. It's just darkening in the under parts really puts the emphasis on the wheels and the treads rather than the other stuff. Now it's just coloring book. So if you look at the plow on that the armored earth mover that I showed for a second, that would be on the second reference sheet, which will be included in the package. It had a really cool configuration on the side of the plow, and if you look at that reference with the thumbnail, I almost lifted that part. But you get away with it if you don't do it too much. I have a tendency to keep making the next one bigger than the last one, and they can get out of hand. When you deliver your final thumbnails, you definitely want them to be proportional to each other, otherwise it'll be confusing. And you'll put unnecessarily emphasis on one thumbnail over the other. I mean, you generally want them to be about the same size so that your client can make an impartial judgment. Unless, of course, you want to emphasize one that you really like, in which case you might make it a little bit bigger, which is fair. So I'm going to lift that connection, and now you can see me cheating. I shift copied this one and decided those treads are kind of weak. Let's see what this hull looks like with a different tread set. Or maybe I didn't do it yet. I think I'm going to do it though. That was a pretty simple solution. Mirroring that guy. Take it out, change it a little bit, and you've got an almost new concept. And one that works better, I think, than the original. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to take those treads and put them there, and makes a better design. I definitely like that one with those treads over the original one. I think I was trying to decide on some sort of extra feature on the front. Change it up just a little bit. Get that to sit in there. Make it look like it's a part of this newer concept. And there I go again. I'm shifting that guy. Try out that hull with that tread set. You definitely wanted to think about designing these vehicles as a whole, but it's not a bad idea to mix up the parts that you like individually and sort of design parts individually. And so there you see that it was a simple transform change to the front section, and then grabbing a rectangle of pixels and stretching it, and with that small proportion change, the vehicle concept's quite different. Looks more like a research thing now, like it's intended to hold more in the hull than being this really low looking thing. This vehicle was intended to be not a military thing, but it was inspired by military stuff, which has military purposes. So for the design that I ultimately chose to use, I didn't use this particular one that you're seeing right now because it looked a little too military. It didn't have windows. It looks cool without the windows. You know, the reason it doesn't have windows is because it's an armored vehicle, and you know, you don't want your bullets coming in through the windows. But it's also easily rationalized. You can say that this space thing needs to be armored because it's on some crazy hostile environment. So, you know, you can definitely make it work. You can definitely add to your concept if you type that into your deliverable. I really think the more you can explain, the better it's going to make your concept. Even if it's trite, you know. It's all, you know, this is all fiction. We're all making science fiction, and the rules are there to be broken, but you know, we're nerds too, and there's a fictional nerd logic that's applied to all nerdy genres. Star Wars fans will argue forever about fictional facts. So there you've got it. I did 6 thumbnails. The last 2 were variations on the first and the third. But there's enough variation on all of those to make them deliverable. There's a variation. There's a similarity between the set, but there's differences between each individual concept. Thumbnail sketch. You want to number it or letter it for your client so they can refer to that one specifically rather than saying, you know, the one with this and that. Make it all nice and clean. Make them proportional to each other. And there you got it. The Kales 9999 LS Compact Emergency Laboratory, Long Range Laboratory System. Spell things with a K. It makes them cool. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the first episode. Join me for the next exciting installment where I will demonstrate making a block model in SketchUp, which is a very intuitive, easy to learn 3D program that I use frequently in concepting. I'll go over making block models based on the thumbnails that I made in this video, and making rough color sketches based on those block models. So I hope you buy the next one, and I hope you get something out of it.